Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know that for some of you is morning, for some afternoon, for some might be really late in the evening. Thank you for your interest in our webinar series. This is our third webinar in our TESOL Teacher Identity series that Applied Linguistics Intersection is holding this year, and we're absolutely thrilled that we can continue this topic and have a presentation today that focuses on exploring professional identities of non-native English-speaking teachers in the United States. And our presenters today is Dr. Fei Fan, and we congratulate Dr. Fan on her recent defense of her doctoral dissertation. We're so happy that we can have you here so shortly after this very important event. And also Dr. Esther de Jong, who is a past president of TESOL International Association and a professor, and both of our presenters are from the University of Florida. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We ask that all attendees keep your microphones muted. If you feel like you can turn off your cameras, just to preserve the bandwidth. Our presenters will talk for about 40 minutes or so, and as they're presenting, please feel free to type your questions, your comments in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat and collect all of your questions, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end to go over the questions and so our presenters can answer the questions and also perhaps read some comments if time is permitting. So Dr. Fan and Dr. de Jong, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here and to see everybody on this Friday. This is a project that is dear to my heart, although identity research is not my area of focus, but I've learned along the way as I've worked with more and more teachers how important paying attention to teacher identity is. And Fei has done a really interesting research on language teacher identities, particularly for students who come from outside of the United States and then come to the United States for their professional development. So I'm going to let her take it away. This is her work, but so important to be really thinking through language teacher identity and how complex it is and how central it is to the work that we do. Go for it, Fei.
Can everybody see it? Okay. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar. Like the introducer said, my name is Fei Fan. I just graduated, I just defended my dissertation. And this work is mainly about the kind of the pilot study before I did my dissertation during my second year of doctoral program under the supervision of Dr. de Jong, who is my advisor and mentor. And I'm delighted that she is here with me and be happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So along with the increasing number of international teacher candidates who choose to be prepared as English language teachers in the United States, and we realize that they are an integral part of many TESOL programs. And increasingly, studies highlight the challenges that this group of international teacher candidates may encounter. Some of the challenges that during their TESOL teacher preparation, including the relevance of the pedagogical knowledge for their future English teaching in their home countries, and the constant negotiation of the low professional self-esteem as a non-native English speakers becoming language teachers, and the limited job choices due to the foreigner status upon their graduation. And particularly, Park noted that increasingly common scenario that international ESL teacher candidates tend to give up English teaching by choosing to teach their native languages in the United States. And since we needed to explore further about the scenario. This study was basically situated in this context and employed language teacher identity as exploratory lens to understand the experiences of this specific group of English teachers. So language teacher identity can be defined as teachers' dynamic self-conception and imagination of themselves as language teachers, which shapes as they participate in varying communities, interact with other individuals, and position themselves and are positioned by others in social contexts. And studies have shared that the different contexts for the international teacher candidates, language teacher identity development in the TESOL program, including the program-based coursework, specifically through special topics, assignments, or readings, and also through the teaching practicum. Language teacher identity is important because it plays an important role in teacher preparation and practice, since it shapes teachers' pedagogical approaches and interaction with learners, and also shapes teacher candidates' engagement with teacher education and how they interpreted their professional development. So this study, like I said, following Park's observation, aims to examine the language teacher identity construction of Chinese language teachers who graduated from the US-based TESOL program and choose to teach Chinese language in the United States, and specifically ask how the changes in roles and contexts might shape the language teacher identities of Chinese language teachers. To conceptualize language teacher identity, this study drew upon the Varghese et al.'s framework, combining three lenses: identity in practice, identity in discourse, and the racial linguistic nature of language teacher identity that Varghese talked about in 2017. So the identity in practice perspective understand that language teacher identity that involves as language teachers engage in concrete tasks and practices taking places in institutional settings, such as teacher education programs in the schools. And this lens focuses on how teachers' identities are enacted through practices. Well, identity in discourse perspective recognize that identity is constructed, maintained, and negotiated through language and discourse. And this lens emphasizes the diversity of identities and how identities are shaped by context and the power relations theory. The racialization in the field of English language teaching raises scholars' awareness to question the racial linguist ideologies behind what are considered as the appropriate language practices. So drawing on Flores and Rosa's work on about the racial linguistic ideologies, Varghese highlights the importance of unpacking both the language teachers' linguistic and their racial identities together. To explore the richness of the participants' experience and the stories, this study was designed as a narrative case study, and this is like the general overview of the methodology of this study. And but I will specifically mention about the methods that were used in this study later. Convenient purposeful sampling with 3 specific criteria were used as a guideline to select study participants. Since this study specifically focused on the Chinese language teachers, and we need the participants who, as a bilingual user from China and speaks English as additional language, who once participated in the US-based TESOL program, but currently working as a Chinese language teacher in the United States during the time of the study. And after seeing the participant recruitment flyer on the online group, which consists of many Chinese pre-service and in-service teachers, Wen shared expressed the interest and the willingness to participate in the study. Even though this study had only 1 participant, that we still value the richness and the genuine voices of this participant that can provide our very valuable information about experiences of this specific group of teachers. So this study had 3 semi-structured in-depth interviews, but have very different focuses. The first interview aimed to understand one's past life in China and her participation in the US-based TESOL program, while the second interview was about the one's current work of teaching Chinese language in the United States. And the third interview dug into one's story and led her to reflect on the meanings of being the ESL teacher candidate and a Chinese language teacher in diverse contexts. In addition to the 3 formal interviews, 2 unstructured conversations were also conducted for one to elaborate on what she meant during the interviews. This study mainly used a thematic analysis to unpack one's story and to highlight the crucial themes in her lived experience. So before we move to the findings part, I want to introduce you Wen about her richness of the experience, and so everybody knows her better. Very interesting part. So Wen grew up in the northeastern part of China, and coming from a middle-class family with well-educated parents, Wen viewed English as a powerful language to give her a bright future and worked really hard to achieve academic performance on the English exams. Due to her great passion for Chinese language and the Chinese culture, she majored in teaching Chinese to speakers of other languages college in China. Upon her graduation, Wen decided to apply for a master's program in the United States because both Wen and her parents believed that earning an advanced degree in the United States would make her more competitive in a job market. However, she couldn't find a matching program to her undergraduate major. But considering her EFL tutoring experience, she assumed that TESOL was the most relevant major, which was also related to language education, and she assumed that she could be capable of teaching both English and Chinese after graduation. So finally, she enrolled in the master's program in curriculum instruction with a specialization in teaching ESL at the College of Education in the Southeastern United States. After graduating from the program, she decided to stay in the United States and apply for Chinese language teaching programs. And eventually, she was hired by a private-owned language institution in Washington, D.C. So as charting Wen's professional life journey, 2 important transitional periods emerged that shaped Wen's language teacher identities. The first major transition came when Wen moved from China to begin the master's program in the United States. And the second major transition happened when Wen had to negotiate her career options upon graduating from the program within the US context. And Wen's story showed the shifts of roles and expectations of being the English language teacher as she changed different contexts. While recalling her experience teaching English to Chinese children, Wen was very confident in teaching EFL. She believed that the main expectation for a Chinese EFL teacher was to master skill, to do explicit grammar instruction, and to prepare students for English exams. And in that sense, she felt that she was a capable English language teacher. Well, in contrast, the role of being the ESL teacher in the United States became vastly different. Wen believed that preparing ELLs to achieve native level English proficiency in order to work and live in the United States, the ESL teachers should have skill sets such as native fluency and accuracy so as to set example for the ELLs. Then she viewed herself as not as having such native level English proficiency. She constructed her identity as an unqualified English language teacher. The study also showed the shifts of highlighted and linguistic identities. When When having had English tutoring experiences in China, she felt competent to be an English language teacher. Well, although being aware that she did not speak English as her native language, she never claimed herself as a non-native English speaking teacher. And such confidence led her to choose TESOL as the specialized major for her graduate study. Soon after starting in the TESOL program, Wen compared herself to the native English-speaking peers in the program and stopped claiming herself as a competent English teacher. Well, during this time, her self-identification as a non-native English-speaking teacher stood out throughout the program, and she did not resist to the NI identity, but instead accepted and meanwhile claim herself in this way. So such NI status gave one a sense of lacking competence in English, and also defeated her confidence as a defeated her confidence to find the ESL teaching position in the United States. Her feeling of being the nest had gone until the language institution provided her a chance to work in the to teach Chinese language in the after-school program at a local charter school in Washington, D.C. And the diverse population of the students in the charter school contributed to the linguistic and cultural diversity of the school. And Wen, as the only Chinese and English bilingual teacher, valued by the administration, her colleagues, and students and parents, which contributed her to position herself as a multi-competent bilingual speaker. One story also showed that the shifts of participation in diverse communities of practice. So studying teaching Chinese to speakers of other languages as a major in her college, Wen really enjoyed her professional development in Chinese language teaching, actively participated in a program, and viewed herself as a prepared teacher candidate. Well, however, later study in the TESOL program, Wen began to recognize that she didn't really prepare herself as a ESL teacher candidate, and particularly being surrounded by a group of native English speaking teachers in the program, Wen felt that she did not have any specialty in terms of professional knowledge and the English language abilities. So like I mentioned, that her EFL teaching experience in China contributed to her a full participant in the English language teaching community, and such full participation that make Wen feel confident and believe herself as a legitimate English language teacher. While her teaching in the U.S. context as a ESL teacher, that Wen was marginalized by the uncritical appropriation of native speaker paradigm in the TESOL program, and viewed herself as a peripheral participant in the English language teaching community. And such peripheral participation that make her believe herself as an illegitimate English language teacher. And since deciding to be a Chinese language teacher working in the United States, teaching Chinese in a public school was one stream. But she did not meet the requirements to work in public schools or private schools, in that she neither had the green card or teacher certificate. But viewing public school teachers who had regular teaching and were provided with professional development, as the full participant in the professional teacher community, Wen regarded herself as only working at the periphery of such community in a private-owned language institution, and not as a real teacher. And finally, Wen's story showed the changes of her teaching philosophy. deeply influenced by the Confucius culture, that one was educated by the teachers not only to obey teachers' instructions and demands with no question. So when she taught Chinese language to foreigners during her college, that she used a teacher-centered approaches. However, learning ideas from the TESOL program, that Wen changed her teaching philosophy and her role as a teacher. She stopped shaping herself as an authoritative teacher, but rather being willing to truly understand her students and to be a facilitator in her teaching. So after looking the Wen's experiences through starting from her study from China to the US-based TESOL program and to her Chinese language teaching, this study reviews two major insights: the contextualized nature of language teacher identity and language teacher identity construction, and the invisible critical reflection on racial linguist ideologies. So the contextualized nature of language teacher identity shows how one was positioned as differently competent in a shifting learning or teaching context affected her language teacher identity construction. So in China, Wang was positioned in the Chinese and English language teaching environment where exams and the grammar really mattered, and her competence to prepare the students for the grammars and for the exams through the acknowledgement by the parents and the students constructed her identity as a capable English teacher. And transitioning to the US-based TESOL program, she was positioned in the program where lacked counter discourse to native speakerism ideology. So her lacked linguistic competence in English compared to the native English-speaking peers constructed her identity as an honest and an unqualified English teacher. But shifting to the charter school where Wan taught Chinese language, she was repositioned in the supportive school climate where linguistic and cultural diversity was really valued. So Wan's bilingual competence for both communication and teaching reconstructed her identity as a multi-competent bilingual teacher. And related to the contextualized nature of language teacher identity, this study points out that how one's own sense of language teacher identity changed as she shifted context. So in China, Wan basically reframed herself, or her language teacher identity was framed around the teaching competence focus as a legitimate English language teacher, while in the TESOL program, she framed herself around the language proficiency focus as an honest and an illegitimate English language teacher. While shifting to the Chinese teaching environment, her language teacher identity was reframed around bilingual skills and the teaching competence, and constructing her as, herself as a multi-competent bilingual teacher. Well, the finding also noted the invisible critical reflection on racial linguistic ideology, because Wan seldom explicitly spoke of her peripheral participation in the TESOL program and the US-based ESL community as a result of her ethnicity nor non-whiteness. And this finding echoes other studies in which some Chinese students did not critically express opinions about their racialized experience related to their self-perceived non-standard English, but instead insisting that it was their responsibility to speak grammatically correct English with American accent as a good English teacher in the United States. As Kubota pointed out, that the idealization of Western culture and the power of English language makes Asian teachers really challenging to critically reflect on the racial linguist ideology as the larger structural inequities. Therefore, more studies needs to explore how Asian ethnic English language teachers understand the racial linguistic nature of identities. So as considering the case of one within the broad literature of language teacher identities, there are several implications for TESOL teacher education can be noted. Since current TESOL programs consist of teacher candidates coming from diverse cultural backgrounds, it is really important for the teacher educators in the program to truly value and affirm all teacher candidates, but particularly international teacher candidates' life histories. Examples can be like providing the critical language autobiography, and the language map can be used in the class activities. And in addition, teacher educators should be conscious of how the nests are positioned and what labels reflecting the deficit ideologies that we were used in the TESOL programs. So studies have demonstrated that the critical program discourses can positively affect on international teacher candidates' identities as a multi-competent user. So moreover, since current study mainly focusing on supporting the group of nests, it is highly necessary to cooperate both groups of nests and nests, and to have them engage in the critical reflection and the interaction with each other. And it is necessary also for teacher educators to facilitate the native English speaking teachers to really understand the privilege they have and the issues of justice before going to the profession. And since this study demonstrated the importance of the context playing a role in shaping international teacher candidates shift and embrace multiple contexts and multiple identities, it is important for the teacher educators to really paying attention to the different context of English language teaching and prepare the teacher candidates to teach in different contexts in their future teaching. And related to this point, that teacher programs need to be realized to constantly challenge or problematize the Western-centered TESOL curriculum or the pedagogies, and to add more advocate for the localized English teaching. So these like the references for this study, and I'm happy to share it with you. And if you like to reach out the article that we published, then here is the citation. And that's pretty much my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fei. Do we have any questions from the audience? Susan is asking to see the publication, the references, or no, the publication title. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So your chapter, your article.
I encourage people to look at the whole journal, because there's a special topics piece, right, on identity, and a lot of really, really cool articles in that issue.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really nice presentation. Thank you. Still waiting for a few questions from the audience. Let's give them some time.
So while everybody is thinking about the questions, I'm very curious, and thank you very much. This is such a great insight, and listening to you, I'm of course thinking about TESOL candidates that I work with who perhaps go through somewhat similar positioning, and regardless whether they are international students or they are US-based students, kind of figuring out who they are as teachers and positioning themselves also within the TESOL community, within the community of their classmates. But I'm also curious, when you were engaging in this research, because we also always talk about kind of like this positionality, how we reflect on our own identities, and talking to your um, research subject, your research participant. Um, what might be for you some of the identity themes and topics that kind of you were experiencing or grappling with as a researcher and as someone who might also kind of have certain shared experiences with your research participants?
Right, because I was a master's student before in a TESOL program. I certainly experienced some like mentor teachers in a practicum telling me that I did not speak standard English. But it was really interesting to see this participant like one's experience as without any empowered discourses in the program or any mediating tools to help her to negotiate her her challenges, that I felt I had the mediating space as a when I went through my teaching practicum. I really saw my teaching competence as an English language teacher. So even though I was told by the mentor teacher that you did not speak English as a standard English, like American English, I think I ignored his comment, because I really realized that as a teacher or as practicing teacher or teacher educator, my goal is to work with the students. So as long as the students are really satisfied with my work, with my teaching, and that's it, that's enough. So I think that providing the mediating tools for the teacher candidates, no matter it's international or US based, that was really important for them to to see more multiple identities or empowered identities that they can take on. So that's a really big insight for me as a researcher when doing this study. So that's why I had continued to do my dissertation of following on this part, and some of the findings of my dissertation also echoed my personal experience or demonstrated that the importance of providing the mediating tools for the teacher candidates to restructure his or her identities.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question, if you don't mind. So you suggested at the end as in implications for your study or for future research or future changes to how we conduct trainings of future teachers. So yeah, so you say preparing teacher candidates to teach in different contexts. So how do you suggest some of the things that can be implemented in these teacher preparation programs to create better prepared future teachers?
Well, yeah, I noticed that it's kind of hard for like teacher educators who only received education in the US context, and suddenly they have to think about the other context and of English language teaching. I think it was great to have a conversation or the narrative inquiry space to let the teacher candidates to talk about their teaching in the home countries, and some of the like you can group teachers as certain topics to discuss their teaching in like China or Japan or South Korea, that they can talk about how to better prepare the teachers, how to better prepare the students in their home countries. And then we can, share the thoughts to how to better prepare the students in across contexts outside the United States. I know that teacher educators have to constantly learning, have as a ongoing learner to know how to better prepare teacher candidates at a global context. So I think positioning the teacher candidates as a knowledge expert in their teaching context is also important.
Yeah, thank you. And we have another question from Roderick. What's your take on native speakerism, especially in hiring ESL or EFL teachers? Many language schools in Asia only hire native speakers.
Well, I'm not sure that many school, what does it many school means? Because in my experience, I think international school, they kind of prefer native English speaking teachers, but also the majority of public schools, they kind of still prefer non-native English speaking teachers. Or I have to, reframe this term that I don't want to say non-native English speaking teachers. They are the teacher who are very familiar with the context that they are going to teach, like the curriculum, the policy, who the students are, and the background they have. So I mean, the international school, the private school, they may have the situation, but for the public school, I think they still prefer the teachers who really know the students and really know the curriculum and the context. So I think that asserting that your teaching ability is really important. Letting them know that you are not only speaking English as a, having with the British accent or American accent, but it's more importantly shown that your professional expertise as a capable, helpful English teacher.
Thank you. And we have one more question from Yulitza. What is the most difficult issue to handle when you are teaching English as a foreign language?
Difficult thing to work with EFL teachers.
So the most difficult issue to handle when you are teaching English as a foreign language?
Oh. I think it really depends on context. Like EFL context is really big. I mean, in China, I think the most difficult things to handle is to implement, I won't say it's Western-based activities, but really focusing on how to improve the students' communicative ability. Like, we are learning English not only for exams, even though exam is a major component, but implement some of the activities or even very meaningful tasks for them to truly improve the English as part of their life, not as a tool for exams. That was the most difficult thing, because the current EFL teachers still had the mindset that we're teaching English for exams or for grammar, but kind of shifting their mindset to really positioning English language as part of our life, as a culture, as a communicative tool. That was challenging. Still have to do a lot of work for that.
And I would add to that, as long as we have an assessment system that that emphasizes only a certain set of English skills, it's going to really cause dilemmas for teachers, right? Because they know they have to prepare their students to pass the exam, yet they know also that that does not serve other purposes of using language and learning how to communicate. So I think paying attention to our assessment systems really plays a really important role there. As part of our teacher preparation as well, because that's part of the realities of teaching are often shaped by these very specific and high stakes testing that is happening.
Yeah.
I want to say something about one of the comments. And now, of course, I lost my chat. I think it might have been, Anne, about the fact that English and teaching English is not just, this focus is on K through 12, because that's what the program tends to focus on.
Sure, I understand.
Sorry. Yeah. That there's other Englishes, right, that we prepare for and that we need to prepare for in terms of the different ways that we use that. And I think it would be very interesting to do a similar kind of study around what happens when students start entering the workplace and we prepare them for the workplace and preparing for that? And is that any different in terms of thinking about language teacher identity when we think about what you call, workplace English or occupational English? I think it would be fascinating. I think that would be fascinating because, and I think you're right, there's a huge need for that.
Yeah. Could I just add something here?
Sure.
Sure. I really appreciated the conceptualizing and organizing of your thoughts that you put into the presentation. So thank you very much for that work that you contributed to our edification. Thank you so much. I think because English for occupational purposes is so new in the whole field of English language teaching, that we really need to offer much more preparation for it so that people are aware of that as another career path. And as I mentioned in my comment, there are so many more stakeholders involved in industry. Of course, that varies by industry sector, but we become trainers in that context, and we become part of the training team within the industry. And that is a whole different identity from being a teacher in an educational setting. And in industry, we really have to be aware of our responsibility to improve job performance and the consequences, perhaps for safety, for environmental protection, for cost-benefit analysis, for customers, for stakeholders of all kinds. So we have to take on a much larger awareness of the whole economy in which we are operating as a trainer within industry. I've been lately specializing in aviation, and we have pilots and air traffic controllers who don't speak English well enough to land and take off planes safely. The safety factor is huge, and we need to see ourselves as not just English teachers, but we are the protectors of the safety of the flying public. So that is a huge identity for us to take on, and it is absolutely accurate. So I just wanted to throw out that wider view of our identity. So thank you for letting me raise these points. Thank you.
That's a great addition. Thank you for that.
I think we have some time for more questions or comments.
One more question from Christina. Thank you. One of your implications is preparing teacher candidates to teach in different contexts. How can different contexts be simulated or communicated in teacher training? What's your thought on that?
I think it's challenging, right? In terms of actual like in class, if you will, experiences. At the same time, I wonder if we can take advantage of the virtual environment here, where more and more, especially now here in the United States with COVID-19 and teachers teaching digitally, might there be ways that you can use simulation programs that will actually simulate different contexts? We're kind of experimenting with that. There are different, programs for that, but I wonder if you could do it that way as one way of doing it, because obviously, simulating a class of 50 students like you might encounter in other places, when really the classes that you have here are 20 some or 15, that might be harder. But I think that's one way to think about this. And another way I think is to at least continues to have the conversation around that. So if this is a strategy, what we sometimes find with the students are, well, I cannot do this strategy when I have 50 people, like, cooperative learning, like the example. And it's like, well, let's think this through. If we know and understand using language with one another is important, and that you don't want to be the only resource for using language, right? what ways can you structure a large group of students to do that? So at least we're not assuming the small classroom size with everything that we do when we introduce new strategies. So at least you can begin that conversation on, well, what could it look like? And I remember talking to a colleague who was teaching in Vietnam, and he's like, so I had about 80 people in my classroom. And he's like, what I did in the end was, of course, I did cooperative learning, but I also knew that I'm not the only expert. So he just gave everybody the tools to work together. And so he could essentially decentralize this, and they were managing their own groups. And so he did, you know, with a very large group, very successful project-based learning. And so he just kind of problem solved around that. And I think those are great examples to have, where yes, you need to accommodate and adjust, but it doesn't mean that you can do it. But we have to have the conversation that teaching in a secondary school here in the United States is not the same as teaching high school English in Korea. And what are some of those differences? And as Fei said, the expertise is already in the class in terms of what it looks like, at least, and then we can have a conversation of what might work as well.
I wonder also if this is also a question of readings and materials. And when we select our, build our syllabi and select the readings and select the materials, kind of bringing in case studies and publications from outside of sort of like US, UK, yep. Australia, New Zealand, yep. Kind of bringing in EFL context where our students can see how, let's say, I don't know, digital literacies are introduced in various spaces, or how some aspects of cooperative learning or project-based instruction introduced in different parts of the world. I think as Esther, you pointed out, with now classes being online, we're kind of getting better and better of doing this virtual and having speakers and teachers from other places talk to our students. So our students from those places can relate to them, and our students from other places can actually see the new perspectives and new approaches.
And if I just can make a plug here for TESOL, this is one of the reasons why being part of TESOL International is so powerful, because you always have somebody you can connect with in another context and say, tell me about your context. So we are a tremendous resource for one another. So I think being part of a professional organization that is this international, that you can find people, right, who can provide examples, if you can find examples, who are typically very willing to do like share resources and or maybe do a guest lecture. And so we're tremendous resources for one another too, I think, within the organization to help with that.
We have one more question. Based on your own experience as a student teacher in a TESOL program and your findings from your study, what would you say how professors in TESOL programs in English-speaking contexts should address their own preconceived notions about international student teachers, or NSTs, as they conduct TESOL programs?
Wow. How professors in TESOL programs. Okay. I think at the beginning of the teacher preparation, when the professors meet the students and kind of have, it was really necessary and good to have the conversation about how the faculty members themselves to their perceptions of the English teachers. Are they the bilingual teachers who are, addressing their multi-competence, when they starting in the teacher preparation? So the professors, I think they should have the ongoing critical reflection as well. How the teacher candidates should be viewed, and how their the histories or backgrounds should be viewed, or like I said, the first point of my implication is really need to value and truly valuing and affirming their histories. So when the faculty member constantly engage in this critical reflection of how to view the different perspective of English language teaching and English language teachers, and then they kind of have the more empowered or critical view of these non-native English speaking teachers as a multi-competent bilingual teacher, rather than constantly saying that, oh, your English is not good enough, or some of the faculty that I think they try to ignore, not saying about the periphery participation of the international teacher candidates in the program. So the students internalize that feeling. So when the faculty member constantly reflect on that point, and they take actions as well, and more actively engaging the international students in the program, and put them really providing them a feeling of as the expert of the English language teaching in the field, rather than, oh, you're coming from an outside context, not really important or irrelevant in our program. I think that's important.
And I would add to that in order to do that, I think to do that critical self-reflection, and building your own awareness of, as a teacher educator, where do you come from? What notions do you hold about this? I think it's a collective process there. I mean, till you are aware yourself, it's hard. For example, what Paulina was suggesting is to even decide, oh, I need to have readings from outside of the United States, right? You have to kind of build an awareness of where to go with that. So I think it's and a self-study that might be a very powerful tool. I think, you can't just put it on the candidates to be critically reflective and not do that same work as a teacher educator, right? It's like we have to do this all together, because we all come in with notions, assumptions, ideologies, and biases. And so I think it definitely everybody's work.
Yeah, I think another point is that, having this narrative inquiry space or conversation with the teacher candidates is also helpful. Like when I conducted a study, the moment that I talked with the teacher candidates, then I suddenly realized that how she or he was positioned in this program. But if we don't have this conversation, till the end of their teacher preparation program, it was really hard to know that how they feel. So constantly having this conversation is really important. Like you said, the teamwork, the collaborative work, everyone in the program is the expert.
Yes, thank you. I think you're raising very, very important points that move our professional development forward, as people in teacher education and in the TESOL profession. And everyone viewed as an expert is a crucial point for our TESOL education, I think. Yeah.
And is sharing another comment. I'm going to read it to you and to everybody. I think the INEST has valuable perceptions and perspectives to share about the usage and status and many other factors about English in their own countries. So INESTs from many different countries become a native source of this important data. Right, yeah.
Okay. Are there any last minute comments and thoughts that anybody would like to share as we are concluding our webinar?
All right. Maybe that was it. So thank you everybody for showing up and for coming today. Paulina, would you like to add anything?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for our presenters, for really wonderful presentation and excellent research. And again, as we've been moving through the series of webinars based on the special topics issue of the TESOL Journal on TESOL identity, it's really fascinating to see yet another angle of this very complex and very relevant and very difficult topic, and this insight is very valuable today for I think for all of us, for many of us. For me, as someone who works with TESOL candidates like this, really kind of getting me to think what else I can do in the classes and in my mentorship process. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who joined us today, for your comments and your questions. And please stay tuned for our 4th webinar coming up in February by Blanca Caldas, who will also talk about racialized identities in TESOL and language education. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful
Let me
weekend.
just add, because I get emails later after the webinar about the recording. So I just wanted to add that we take a few days to wait for the recording to be processed by TESOL. So, and once it's ready, this recording is going to be available on the TESOL YouTube channel. And everybody who registered is going to get a notification from TESOL saying that the video is ready.
Yeah. And we'll send
So
another
I would also like to
announcement.
thank the presenters today, Faye and Esther, for joining us today.
A pleasure.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.